Is it me or is this just some kind of Nazi shit? I mean, there is a historical precedent of white supremacists doing this. Yes, in the 60s and 50s, they did this to black people in the southern states. I mean, this has been happening for a long time. Even, I mean, this every period of American history has its own version of white supremacist shit, like all the way from internment camps, the Bracero program that specifically targeted Hispanic migrant workers, the internment camps for the Japanese, and also, you know, black people in general were shipped out from southern states to northern states. This has always been a part of you know, American white supremacist history. So I don't even know where to start and where to end. A trail of tears for the indigenous population. Like it's easier to find a time. Actually, no, I don't even know. I like, is there a period in American history where this hasn't happened to to whatever a group of the population that the dominant white supremacist forces considered to be the underclass or not human? Oh yeah, here it is. Reverse freedom rides, an echo of Martha's Vineyard migrants flights 60 years ago. Here it is. Okay. Tricked by segregationists with promises of work and housing, black families were dropped off in Cape Cod with nothing. Eliza Davis was bewildered the day she arrived in a wealthy tourist town in Cape Cod. An agricultural worker, she had been promised work and housing if she took a free trip to another state. Days later, disembarking with her 8 children, she had little idea where she was, that a president had a family compound down the road, or that she was a pawn, as locals told the New York Times, in a political stunt. Davis, 36, was not among the migrants who arrived on Wednesday on Martha's Vineyard, a resort island off Cape Cod where former President Barack Obama has a home. She was a black woman from Alabama, bused and abandoned in Hyannis, Massachusetts in 1962, not far from the holiday home of President John F. Kennedy. Today's migrants in Martha's Vineyard are now being transported to the same Cape Cod military base that housed the Reverse Freedom Riders decades ago. That's what it was called. It was part of the so-called Reverse Freedom Rides arranged by white segregationists in 1962 in retaliation for the Freedom Rides of the previous summer, when black and white volunteers rode buses through the South supporting desegregation. The plot was organized by white supremacist Citizens Council in Arkansas, who bought radio ads and made flyers advertising the opportunity to African Americans. They focused on recruiting men with criminal records and single mothers with a lot of children, cynically presuming white liberals would welcome them the least. Layla Mae Williams, an Arkansas woman who was also dropped off in Hyannis with her 9 youngest children, was dressed in her finest clothes because she had been told Kennedy himself was going to greet them when they arrived. According to the 2020 NPR report, she had packed little else because anything she needed was going to be provided, she was told. Along with the new arrivals, local Hyannis officials received anonymous letters, according to the Times, saying things like, Abe Lincoln sowed the seeds, and now the North can reap the harvest. And we have put up with millions of N-words for 100 years, so why should you squawk? It was a contrast to the Great Migration of the previous decades, during which white residents did everything they could to stop black workers from leaving. Families would often have to sneak to the train station under the cover of darkness or use other subterfuge to escape, described in detail by historian Isabel Wilkerson in her book, The Warmth of Other Suns, The Epic Story of America's Great Migration. Southern segregationist groups baldly deceived black families using tactics consciously parodying the Freedom Rides, noted Clive Webb, an American history professor at the University of Sussex, in 2004 paper on the Reverse Freedom Rides. They said they promised free transportation plus $5 for expenses to any Negro man or woman or family, no limit to size, who desire to migrate to the nation's capital or any city in the North of their choosing. Notices were also posted in prisons offering free transportation to prisoners whose sentences were set to expire. So what the white supremacists did back then was look for, optically speaking, look for the worst, you know, they were racist. They were like, here's what will look the worst. Here's what white liberals will say no to the most likely to say no to. Except that fell on their face too. Why can't this just be done in reverse and all the hogs get shipped to Florida? Then we let Florida be its own country. Hey guys, I am on board with that. You already know that. Listen, if you're not taking your medication, I suggest you do. Okay. Then, as in now in Cape Cod, many residents of Hyannis met the riders with open arms. A local committee formed to provide housing, clothing, and money for the new arrivals. Davis and at least 50 other, including 33 children, were housed in the dormitory of a nearby community college. Others were housed in private homes, and later, a nearby army barracks that was used until they could be placed with jobs and housing in the surrounding area. Those army barracks are being used again, for the record. Massachusetts Governor John Volpe condemned the rides as traffic in human misery. They're doing that again. The only way to meet such cruelty is by wisdom and love. Episcopal Bishop Anson Phelps Stokes Jr. told the Associated Press he urged the residents to show understanding and compassion. The welcome was not universal. When Massachusetts governor asked for federal help, the Kennedy administration declined. Kennedy called it a rather cheap exercise, but otherwise avoided the issue. Shouts out to the Kennedy admin for that one, by the way. In New York, a few dozen black people arrived from Louisiana. City officials paid the bus fare for at least 6 to return to their home state, according to the Times. Some of the Southerners sent to Hyannis got jobs as cooks or chambermaids or in candle making factories, according to the 1964 column in the Boston Globe. When the summer ended, the jobs in Hyannis dried up. All but one family left. Victoria Bell, who appears in the photo at the top of the story, lived in Hyannis for the rest of her life, working as a nurse to the elderly and volunteering to help the poor, according to news clippings in the Barnstable Patriot. At least one of her children made the honor roll at school, and some still live in the area. Bell died in 2000. Remember, these were white supremacist segregationists that did this. Within a few years, Layla Mae Williams and her kids ended up in a Boston housing project where the family struggled without nearby relatives. One of her daughters told NPR's Code Solution 2020. Racist white neighbors resented their presence in public schools and harassed them. Reverse freedom rides ended up backfiring politically, Webb argued, because even moderate segregationists were put off by the cynical manipulation of poor African Americans. Remember, moderate segregationist was a term. Do you understand? We're talking, and like I said, moderate segregationist is just such a profoundly f***ed up take, but it is the reality, because American history and American culture is guided by white supremacist fundamentals. Do you understand? But trapped within that reality is exactly what I'm saying. People who literally are like, I'm a moderate on segregation. We're like, yeah, it's kind of up what you did to those black folk. You get it? Do you understand? Do you see what I'm saying here? Because ultimately, even back then, people were like, I'm not racist. How dare you say that? Separate but equal. If people were to recognize their own inherent racist values, their own inherent white supremacist ideals, then there would be no need for, the whitewashing of American history. Okay? Do you understand? That's why they didn't say segregation is just straight segregation. They said it's separate but equal. Do you understand? There's always a need to, because conservative values unironically go against all of the better principles that people are taught to believe in. Like sharing, turn the other cheek, okay? Treat others as though you would be treated yourself. Like, these are all values that we learn at an early age that are good, but they are always diametrically opposed to conservative principles like, steal, lie, cheat, who gives a fuck everybody else? The taxes. Don't share. Be cruel to others that don't look like you. The cruelty is the purpose, because it is completely opposed to what it takes to be a good person, okay? It is completely the opposite of what it takes to be a good person, which is why people still otherwise consider themselves to be empathetic and kind and nice individuals. But when they see someone getting duped like this, even then they're going to be like, this is up. Look, the scheme had never been condoned by the better thinking people here. New Orleans radio and television station WDSU denounced the campaign as sick sensationalism bordering on the moronic. A Gallup poll published in June 16, 1962 showed widespread disapproval of the council's tactics among white Southerners. In the end, only about 200 people were ever sent on the reverse freedom rides, far fewer than the 1,000 migrants who have been transported north of D.C., New York, and now Massachusetts in the past few months. If you've ever heard conservatives talk about how nice they are, they oftentimes will talk about how much they give to their church and how much philanthropy they do, right? Why do those things matter? Those things matter to them. Ultimately, they do think that they're nice people. So when you very openly are like, nah, this is not nice, we're going to do like really horrible shit, even some conservatives are going to turn around and be like, wait a minute, okay, that's a little up. Ah, yes, so much tax-free income for the church, so altruistic. Guys, I'm not saying it's a good thing. You're failing to comprehend what I mean. Do you understand? You are not seeing the larger, broader picture, and that is how people view themselves. Every person view themselves as a nice person from their own perspective, regardless of how racist their attitudes might be. So when you see an immediate contradiction within how people fancy themselves and what their political representatives are doing on their behalf, some people are not going to like that. That is part of the reason why I am saying that this is one of those things that could potentially blow up in Ron DeSantis and Governor Greg Abbott's face. But there's still going to be plenty of conservatives that say, nah, that, okay? There's still going to be plenty of conservatives that look to this and go, no, this is great. This is actually so good. Isn't kindness based on an individual basis? So who are we to judge what kindness, or is your point is that it's based on reactionism and therefore it doesn't matter what feelings are based on? Feelings stem from a non-individual basis? Wait, what? We already saw an example of this. When it comes to abortion, because white women get abortion too. Conservative white women get abortions as well. Nobody no matter how much you think abortion is murder, you're not going to sit there and be like, yeah, it's a good thing that a raped 12-year-old had to go over state lines to get a fucking abortion. Some Republicans wild out and champion that kind of attitude, but ultimately the broader majority of Republican voters even are going to look at that and go, yeah, that's kind of fucked up. And for those of you who say that's not the case, look at the polls. It certainly is the case. Look at Kansas. Doesn't matter how deep red that shit is, okay? You can say they don't care. You can say that they don't care and you know, Trump supporters don't care. And you might know Trump supporters that don't care, but the broader majority of people that are otherwise not super politically motivated, that don't really look into this, but are just like repeating shit that they've learned from other people or, you know, things that they've seen on a Fox News coverage, those people still have the capacity to turn around and be like, yeah, this is kind of up actually. You're not going to hear that on our hyper-partisan news cycle, but ultimately plenty of people still fancy themselves to be good people, and they do see things like this as a misstep. They do see things like this as too far. You're not saying they're actually good people, just that they think they're good people. They're nice and good. It's basic human psychology. Exactly. And there are, no matter what happens, there are certain things that you do, right, that will trigger people, like the inherent contradictions in the actions of political representatives will sometimes genuinely pose a threat, okay? Will genuinely be so obvious, so apparent that even people that fancy themselves as good people, regardless of being Republican or regardless of having like white supremacist and misogynistic takes, will still go, that's fucked up, that's too much for me. And I think this could be another instance where it has happened, at least in the past, when they did this exact same thing to black people, when segregationists did this. Again, like I'm showing you, there's empirical evidence to showcase that like this was not viewed in a positive way by the broader majority of people living in Arkansas even. In the 1960s, the buses were funded by anonymous people donated to private segregationist groups which aimed to tell the North to put up or shut up, as one New Orleans leader said. DeSantis has now said how the flights he arranged to Martha's Vineyard were funded, but Texas Governor Greg Abbott has used state resources and donations for the buses, and both have been eager to take credit. They're doing the exact same thing that white supremacist segregationists did in the 60s, and they're using state funds to do it. And ultimately, I think that this has the capacity to backfire.